Okay, we're going to get started.
Mike Little, yeah.
Apparently, there are about 40 books or material packages short. I was advised that they printed off 375 copies, which matches the number of registrations, but I guess some have disappeared. So they're printing off another 40 right now. They should be here probably within the hour. So by the time you're done, you should be able to pick up any missing copies. I've been asked to remind you by Paul Truster as well, if you can please fill out the yellow forms, which is essentially a ranking of the speakers and so forth, your thoughts on the program, and ensure that prior to leaving today, you actually deposit them in the box out front. We're going to start off for the second part of our program on the topic entitled Bank Readiness. Two people, who are speaking on this topic. The first will be James Leal, who will be dealing with discharges and electronic funds advances, and he will be followed by Little, who's Kim Little's son, dealing with instructions to lawyers, standard charge terms, and additional provisions. So I'd like to ask James to start off.
Okay, actually, before I start off, I'm going to from Terranet. Mike speaking very briefly on the first three aspects, which I don't have in front of me, on bank readiness. One of the things that Terranet and the ministry, I think now Commercial Business Services, is that what did, is they organized a mortgage lenders working group. And of that, obviously, is to make sure that the banks are coming online with the lawyers in terms of their instructions and other things. So Mike is going to speak a bit about the bank readiness, and in particular, instructions to lawyers, standard charge terms, and additional provisions. Mike?
Thanks, Jamie. I was approached by Jamie and Maurizio to talk a little bit. We had tried to get some folks from the banks to talk today, and unfortunately they were all busy counting their money or something. But I did an informal survey prior to coming here, just to find out about how ready the banks were, and I asked them to grade themselves and submit a mark, and they all said they had an A+. I don't know. But anyway, to begin, there is some conception that the banks aren't quite prepared. My role with Terranet has been to work with the banks, and I've been working with them for the last couple of years to get them geared up for electronic registration. A number of committees, as Jamie has mentioned, have sprung up as a result of our involvement with the banks. Terranet's been working along with the Ministry of Consumer Commercial Relations with a number of committees, starting with a working group, which was a high-level group of lawyers and general counsel from the banks and mortgage administrators. We spun that off to a legal subcommittee, and that legal subcommittee dealt with a lot of the issues as they particularly pertain to banks dealing with lawyers, instructions to solicitors, schedules, and additional provisions. We also have a Financial Institutions Operations Committee, which is essentially kind of a user group of banks where the major banks get together and talk about process issues around electronic registration. And as well, the joint committee, which Maurizio has talked about, there is representation on that joint committee from general counsel from CIBC, I believe it is. So Terranet, in the past 2 years, we've met with over 100 lenders talking about how to get themselves prepared and how they're going to have to deal with electronic registration. In addition, we've had sessions similar to this, a number of sessions, just to give them the high-level educational overview of it. So from the perspective of whether they're ready, I think we can believe that maybe not A+, but they are fairly ready. They're aware of what's going on. You may find people at the branch level that aren't totally familiar, but for the most part. Let's go. Enter. There we go. So I think the key question that comes back to us, and particularly as we went into Middlesex, the key question that came back to the banks and to Terranet were how are banks prepared for electronic registration, and particularly with respect to electronic registration, how will you register how will you, as lawyers, register the paper documents, paper schedules, and additional provisions in this new electronic environment? And what we've done is we've consulted with the legal community, we've consulted with the banks to try and come up with some solutions to that. I think to give you an example of some of the issues that you're faced with, I'll show you this screen here. This is a screen capture of a charge, of the E-Reg charge. You can't see it at all? You'll all get used to it because you're all going to have it on your desktop. But sure, I don't need. Is that at all better? In basic terms, what you have here is charge provisions as they relate to the mortgage that you're going to be registering electronically. In here is a small box where you can enter in standard charge terms. So that's fairly simple. If we have standard charge term numbers, we're going to just enter in the standard charge term numbers. This big white space in the bottom is where you have an opportunity to enter in the additional provisions, where you could type them in if you wanted to. I've told every bank out there that if you're given a piece of paper if you give the piece of paper to this solicitor and suggest that they type them in, the solicitor's going to come back to you and yell and say no way. So you have carte blanche to go back to them and say, we're not going to do that. We need to have your schedules in some electronic format. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about is what they've done with respect to helping you along with that process. Now the first and preferred method obviously is standard charge terms. So what the Ministry and Teranet have done, and the Ministry has really supported and encouraged banks to refile their any frequently used standard or schedules or additional provisions, refile them as standard charge terms. If you're representing any financial institutions, we encourage you to encourage that back to the institution. I think that's the easy way to go about it. What we've accomplished to that end, Royal Bank has essentially eliminated their schedules and additional provisions and replaced those in the residential environment with standard charge terms. Bank of Nova Scotia is pretty much the same. I think they have a few exceptions where they still have some, maybe their variable rate mortgages, I think, have separate additional provisions that they're still using. The rest still have additional provisions and schedules as we're familiar with right now. The solution we've come up with is Teranet. In the electronic registration environment, you can attach electronic versions of the schedules. They have to be in a format that will work in this environment. And the question is, once the banks have created these documents, how do they get them to the solicitors? So the process that we're going with right now is making them available on the internet. So what's going to happen is I think you're going to start to see banks changing their instructions to the solicitors, making reference to the ability to access schedules and additional provisions at either their URL, their web address, or this teranet.ca/fi-docs. So if you go to this site, you'll find all the major banks have posted their schedules and additional provisions on the site, either creating a link or posting them right on there. There's instructions how to download those documents. You download them onto your computer, and then when you go into the electronic registration of a charge, you can simply attach those documents just as you would attaching something to an email, for example. We have 10 different lenders that have put these documents on the web. As I said, we've approached hundreds of others. Some have chosen to email these documents to you, so that might be something you'll see. But at the same time, we're starting to add more and more onto this website, and those who will have their own websites to do this as well. I would encourage you, if you encounter financial institutions that haven't addressed this problem, feel free to point them back to Mike Little at Teranet, and I'll start to encourage them to go forward with this. Here's an example of what the site looks like, if you can still see it. So you just click on the icon for the financial institution. Their schedules and additional provisions will pop up there, and you'll be able to proceed from there. Here's an example. You can't read that, I'm sure, but that is an example. I think that's a CMHC schedule that's been attached. So that's the final product. That's what it looks like. They're not very fancy. The graphics and formatting has pretty much been eliminated because that's the format that we're working with. We have an option of TXT or PDF versions. This is the TXT version, not very glamorous. But that's the end result. The banks are ready for this. All the major banks, they make up 90% of all the business you're going to be doing. We're working with the others to get them online as well. So as I said, I think you can feel comfortable on this respect. The banks are pretty ready, and I encourage you to point them back to me if you're finding that they're not prepared in any respect. And that's me. We can turn the lights back on.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, I'm going to address a couple things. One of the things in response to a question from Alan Silverstein earlier, I send a bill to that lawyer. Okay, the one who doesn't want to get involved is not computerized. I can also tell you, probably contrary to Law Society regulations, I don't put that account through my accounting system because I'm going to end up paying GST on it. I'm going to write it off 9 times out of 10. But if you notice under practice direction number 2, the Law Society in a practice direction has stated that a lawyer who fails to equip him or herself should compensate the other lawyer on the other side of the transaction who ends up doing more work as a result of the failure. I quite practically, a failure to computerize at this point means you're not going to be practicing real estate. And I don't think this is not the group that, we're not talking about practitioners who would come to this. If you're here, it means generally you're involved, and it's the ones, and we know 5 or 6 of them. I come from Ottawa, there might be only 2 or 3, it's a smaller town, but everybody knows them. They know who they are. These are the people that you never hear from on closing days, and they will always make your life difficult. Okay, let's talk about discharges for a minute. From a business point of view, and I'm a little bit ambivalent about this, I have some BMO stocks, so I like to see them being careful with money, but the banks see the ability to register discharges as a profit center. They will take over registration of discharges. So there are a couple questions that are raised, and I'll tell you what the Joint Committee has done. The first thing it raises is just the basic wording of our undertakings. I actually have a copy here of the September 1992 Advisor Supplement, which is the basis for our current undertaking procedure. This is the cornerstone of the distinction between financial institution mortgages and private mortgages, the form of the undertaking, which, by the way, in Ottawa, we do not use the form of undertaking that was suggested by the Law Society, but we do have one. Quite frankly, the wording here is really not important. The issue that we're looking at now is one lawyer, a couple of lawyers, communicated to the Joint Committee. They were very upset. It said, I will register a discharge. And they said, well, the bank is registering the discharge. I'm lying in my undertaking. And my point of view on that, yes, you can change it. And we suggested some wording that actually went along the lines of to cause a proper form of discharge of the mortgage to be registered as soon as possible after closing. If you were sued on it because it didn't happen, the difference in wording is entirely immaterial. So, yes, if you're being grammatically correct, you can make the change, but there is no real difference there. What we have done is we have asked the banks to follow 3 fairly simple rules. Number 1, and I believe they're going to, in principle, they have agreed to this. Whether we can actually get it put into a practice is going to be another matter. We're recommending that the financial institution include a statement in its discharge statement confirming whether it will be registering the discharge. So A, you've got notice and you've got an actual statement to that effect. 2, we'd like to see an undertaking or commitment, even if it's a best efforts or whatever, that they will do so within 60 days. And we kind of, in the discussions, they had to give us this because, let's face it, we underwrite and facilitate every closing involving a financial institution mortgage. We contractually bind ourselves to produce that discharge, otherwise the deal wouldn't close. So we could all go on strike. in which case, within 2 years, we will not be involved in the business of residential real estate. Or we can attempt to get the banks to come along and get this done. The mechanisms that we're seeing for them to do this, because remember, there's money involved in this for them now, and it's surprising how much faster the banks can move when they see that, okay? And it appears that the systems they're setting up will be able to do this. So if you get it within 60 days, that'd be a goal. Because their concerns are, by the way, that the reason they won't give it on closing, of course, is because they say there's a huge percentage of people who bounce their last pre-authorized payment. And then they find 5 days later, and they've got the whole EO&E issue, and I'm not going to get into that. But they find 5 days later they're short on money. The third item is the lawyer who's providing the undertaking has to be notified. You want to close your file. Okay? And to do that, you've got to get a proper notification. So what we've asked them to do, to incorporate into their registration procedures, when they register, they can press another button and get a copy of the confirmation of registration. Take it, get it up, send it out to the lawyer right there. And the reason we do that, and a lot of lawyers have expressed this concern, is that the banks don't know anything about legal descriptions. And so you're going to end up with partial discharges and discharges on the wrong property. So what you will get is confirmation of a discharge that has a legal description on it. And it's automatically produced. They can do this. So to that extent, we think that there are procedures in place that are, yes, we've lost the $75, $125, I mean, preparing and registering a discharge, but given the fact that that's gone, then the Joint Committee's viewpoint was that what we heard was that the primary concern is A, the accuracy of the discharge, and B, the ability to close our files in a timely fashion. Okay, the DRA. And I noticed that there really is no, for the first one, there's no discussion of the DRA. This is a little bit of a ghost in the corner, a monster under the bed for the Joint Committee. The DRA, as you know, is a document registration agreement that provides the structure by which the practice concerns for non-title documents, money, keys, etc., will be dealt with between lawyers in a remote closing environment. I'm not leaving my desk, you're not leaving your desk. How do we exchange things? If the deal falls apart, what do we do? In the initial stage, the DRA actually represented a way of conceptually moving the closing to the exchange of money and documents, and then having a condition attached to that whereby registration took place. I think it's fair to say the Joint Committee met with a fair bit of resistance. Lynchings and Middlesex in particular, and to their credit, I have come to believe that they were correct, and the banks were correct. The bank's primary concern, which was stated directly to Maurizio and I in a meeting with the Mortgage Lenders Working Group, was that they find out on the day of closing, in a surprising number of cases, that they lied about their income. They don't have this money, they don't have that. And it was a fairly short closing, and they're still getting information in, and on the morning of closing, they find out that they don't have the money they said they had. So they want to stop the transaction. So the new DRA provides that up until registration of the documents, electronic registration, either lawyer can instruct the other, I'm not closing. That does not affect tender. Tender is common law. You would continue to tender in the same process. It might be a little bit different because you're not down at, the logistics of it might be different because you're not down at the registry office. But the banks wanted that right to be able to instruct their solicitors, and we found that a lot of solicitors were very concerned that if they signed an agreement that said they were going to close, and the bank gave them instructions not to close, that they were in a lose-lose situation because they had instructions contrary to what they had obligated themselves to do. So what we've done is we've amended that, and anybody can pull up right up to registration, which of course is what happens now. That's the paper system. You know, you can still get tendered on, but until it's registered, you can back away. Though I'm not entirely sure once you've exchanged documents and someone's standing at the counter, if you go up to the counter, you might have to have a bit of a wrestling match to do that. But finally, I'm going to address, by not addressing, electronic funds transfers. There have been a lot of queries, and there have been requests to the Joint Committee on the matter of electronic funds transfer, direct electronic funds transfer. Why do we have to courier money? Well, the problem with asking the Joint Committee is this is not a law society or CBAO or MCCR, as it then was, issue. This is an issue that the financial community has to come to grips with. It may be that we as lawyers want to talk to our own individual banks and say, by the way, I want electronic funds transfer. I don't want to have to transfer it to you, and you transfer it to that bank, and that bank then puts it into that account because it takes me 8 hours to get confirmation. I want to push a button and send the money from, could be, and the issue of trust account, special trust, special general, whatever account, I want to push the money directly into the vendor's lawyer's account. I want them real time to be able to open up their computer and see that the money's there, okay? Now, that is a very good thing that the Joint Committee wants to promote. Our ability to do so, of course, is infinitesimally small. These are principally the Schedule I banks. You don't get them on site, it's not going to happen. And so all we can tell you is that this is a goal. It is something that the Joint Committee and the Law Society and all the people involved in this are working towards, and I think hopefully there will be advances. But in the short term, do not hold your breath. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. Our next speaker is Silvana Delamonte. She's a graduate of Osgoode Hall and a partner at Blake's. She's in the Commercial Real Estate Group in Toronto, and she'll be discussing issues and strategies with relation to electronic registration.
Thanks, Leonard. Some of you may have been at the introductory electronic registration session held in Toronto back in November of 1997. It can be, that was some time ago. I was there with a couple of other people from my office, and after that session, one of the issues that I saw with respect to the electronic registration software, as it was then contemplated, was that the software could only run on a standalone computer. In other words, it couldn't run on a computer that was part of a network system. I mean, even in a law office with 2 people, this was going to be unworkable and inefficient. So this prompted me to call other colleagues, and my colleagues in other firms, including Brian Bucknell at Osler's, who, as you may recall, was one of the speakers at that 1997 session, to discuss this issue and other issues connected with the introduction of electronic registration. And arising from these preliminary discussions, Brian and I decided to canvass our colleagues to see if they were interested in being part of a user group that would meet periodically to discuss and consider what electronic registration was going to mean for our practices. People were interested, and the user group was formed, which I think had initially about 10 law firms and now includes about, 15 or 20. It's actually becoming quite big. And we take turns hosting lunch or breakfast. Harry actually hosts the breakfast, which are tough for me to attend, but they're wonderful. And, once every few months. And it's been a very helpful process to discuss issues among ourselves and educate ourselves about what electronic registration entails or might entail for us. And right from the very first meeting of the user group, representatives from the ministry and Teranet have been present. And really seriously, they have throughout demonstrated that they're very interested in receiving input from the real estate bar so that they can refine, fix, and improve the system to try to make it work as well as possible for us, for real estate practitioners. And we've also worked together with the Joint Committee on a few matters, passing on our thoughts with respect to changes to the AREA standard form of purchase agreement, for example, or with respect to the document registration agreement. So let me just discuss with you a few of the issues that have been raised over the last few years, some of which have now been resolved, and others of which we're still in the process of discussing with the Ministry or Terranet, or simply considering among ourselves. So the first one was this need for the standalone computer. Now, this is no longer the case. You'll be happy to hear. It's now possible to install the software on a computer that is part of a network system. So I have it installed on my computer in my office, my assistant has it on her computer, and so on. Second item is attachments. Now, there are going to be situations where we're going to have to attach an agreement, for example, to a Form 4 document general, or additional provisions to a charge mortgage of land form where the banks have not made it nice and convenient and had standard charge terms for us. And those attachments are not going to be in the TerraView system, or we're not going to be interested in having our assistants type 26 pages on the TerraView system. It's inefficient. And so, for example, sometimes we're just going to have the document, the attachment in Word or whatever the current software is that we use. And in these cases, we're going to need to import the document into the TerraView system and attach it to the prescribed form. Now, initially, we were advised by Terranet that the document could only be imported as a text file or a TXT file. I don't know what any of this means, but what I did hear was that once you imported it as a text file, you lost all of the formatting. No underlining, no indenting, no paragraphs, no spacing. This is like an illegible document. You just have one big jumble of mushed up words. That doesn't work. So with the recent introduction of TerraView 4.2, you can now attach a document as a PDF file. Now again, not being a techie, I couldn't tell you what that stood for. But what I can tell you is that documents can now be imported into the system, preserving all of its formatting. It really does look like the document on your system that you'd print off. So that actually does work now. The third item is capacity. Now, one of the members of our group recently brought to our attention that when you're preparing an electronic transfer, the capacity field must be completed in order to register the transfer. Now, the capacity field includes some of the following. For example, joint tenants, estate trustee with a will, life tenant, beneficial owner, trustee. In most cases, completing the capacity field will not be a problem. However, there appears to be a problem if you intend to have a trustee hold registered title and you don't want to disclose the trust. You will now, looks like, be obliged to disclose the trust on the public register, which is currently not the case with the paper system. Now, we've taken this matter up with the ministry, and we'll actually be meeting with Kate on the 5th of March, I think, and we're going to work to try to resolve that matter. The fourth item is the bulk preparation of documents. Now, we have at least a couple of members in our group who represent condominium developers and who, in connection with the sale of units of a condominium, may have to prepare 200 transfers, for example. And currently, they prepare those transfers using some kind of software. In our office, we use SoftDocs. That allows them to copy over the first transfer that was created, and you simply change the unit number and the name and address of the transferee. The TerraView software does not have this facility to copy over an existing transfer. Each transfer would have to be prepared separately. Now, this was not an attractive alternative. And so some members of our group met with Terranet people to try to come up with a solution. Terranet recently advised us that with the release of TerraView 5.0, which is expected in the summer, one of the new features is designed to allow us to use our special document preparation software in conjunction with the TerraView software. Now, the fifth item is the document registration agreement, which actually James talked about, so I won't say too much about it, but the Joint Committee also solicited our input in connection with previous drafts of the document registration agreement, and we agreed with the Joint Committee and with the London Bar that it's not only banks that might give you contradictory instructions not to close right up until the very last minute. Your client can decide to do that. And you don't want, by virtue of a DRA, which is an agreement between solicitors, to take away a right that your client would otherwise have. Maybe rights connected with liabilities, but you You can't change those rights that a client now has. Other practice issues. Our group has considered other practice issues as well, such as, how do transactions work in an electronic regime? I'm selling my house to you and I have to use your money to buy another house. In a world of electronic transfer of funds, it's not possible to redirect funds from one transaction to another, as now happens in a conventional registry office closing. We've also briefly considered how tendering might work in an electronic environment, and I had to give that more detailed thought when I gave a talk on this topic a few months ago. We don't have answers on all of these matters, but we're giving them some thought and sharing our views among ourselves. I think these are really areas where the real estate practice in an electronic environment is going to develop over time. Now, even though I've been part of this user group for the last few years, our firm has only done a handful of electronic registrations, and only in the last few months. And most of those have been simple documents, such as a discharge. It was only a few weeks ago that I closed a financing transaction electronically involving a property in London. So while I'm supposed to be giving you a view from the trenches, in large part, Toronto solicitors are not yet in the trenches. I think our user group has been speculating what it might be like to be in the trenches and trying to make it more civilized once we get into the trenches. But we're not there yet. But our time is coming, and my advice to you would be that you might want to get together with some of your colleagues to share ideas or problems. And it's also a good idea to get the TerraView software installed. Even if you don't think you're going to use it immediately, you might be able to get your assistant or somebody else in your office who's interested to start practicing there's an artificial training environment. And there's going to be lots of support from TerraNet and from the ministry, and I can tell you they have been very good throughout, extremely helpful and responsive really to any questions that we've raised over the last few years. And I know that they want our continued feedback so that improvements can continue to be made. And then Valerie Ryan of TerraNet will tell us more about the support and training that TerraNet will provide for electronic registration. And then Kim Little, who really is in the trenches, and Bonnie Yeager will show us how it's done. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Silvana. Our next speaker is, as Silvana had said, Valerie Ryan. She's with TerraNet, and she'll be speaking on TerraNet support and training.
Going to address some training options that are available to you and your staff to help you prepare for electronic registration. Before I talk about training, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the basics, how to get ready. Equipment. You need a certain level of equipment in order to run TerraView effectively. Your hardware, we're looking at a minimum of a Pentium 2 with 64 megabytes of RAM. You'll also require a modem line, or if you have internet access, we would suggest you go internet as a means to connecting to us. If you need additional information on hardware requirements, you can see the staff at the TerraNet booth and they can help you with that. Licensing. TerraView is licensed per PC. So every workstation that has TerraView is required to have a TerraView license. Any individual who is accessing TerraView is required to have a personal security package. And that's whether it's for searching or for document creation. And that disk becomes encrypted with user information, so when a user logs into TerraView, we can authenticate the user and make sure that they're allowed to log in and do the work. Your bank account, well, Katrina addressed the bank account issues earlier. What I'd like to say about that, if you don't have your bank account set up, please get it set up, get the paperwork into TerraNet, so that you're able to register your documents. If you don't have that bank account set up, you cannot register any documents electronically. Training tools. Included with the software, you'll receive a video which demonstrates a transfer and a charge. It goes from one law firm to the other. It mimics a simple deal. It takes about 60 minutes to watch. Don't watch it late at night, early in the evening. There's also a CD which demonstrates the software. The different reference materials. There is a reference guide that is the point and click part of the guide. It will help you navigate through the software using the software. There's the ministry's procedural guide, And that will help you with document requirements. Very, very useful guide when preparing documents for your required statements, mandatory statements. There's also a training manual, which brings me to the training environment, which Silvana briefly mentioned. We've built a dummy database so you can log into TierraView and practice creating documents. It's free. You could create documents, register documents. It's available whenever TierraView is available, and also on Sundays, for those of you who like to work on Sundays. It's probably the most effective, the most beneficial way of learning TierraView through hands-on. And that's why we've built that. Other support that's available, customer service, we have a toll-free 1-800 number and a local 416 number that you can contact TierraNet. There's also a link on that 1-800 number, on that customer service line, to speak to the ministry. So if you have questions on electronic registration, you can call the 1-800 number, press number 1, and you get linked seamlessly through to the ministry, and they can answer questions on your documents. The professional services group, that's my group, and we come in and visit your office and help you get started using TierraView, but make sure you and your staff are a little more comfortable with accessing the system. The TierraNet website, ton of information available there, frequently asked questions and their answers are available, as well as the financial institution, the schedules, the charge provisions, which Mike Little spoke about briefly. You can download those provisions to your desktop and attach them to your document electronically. The practice directives, which are in some handouts, not everybody got them apparently. The college training. Recently we've announced college training for the Toronto area. There's 5 different colleges that are offering these one-day courses. You can send your staff on. It's a great way to learn the system. You can get information on the dates and the locations through our website under calendar. And there's also information available at the TierraNet booth that they'll provide you with a schedule. In closing, I just want to kind of reinforce that it's software, there is a learning curve. You have to take time to practice. That's the only way to learn the system. Allow your staff time to practice. If you're unfamiliar with TierraView, if it's new to your office, I would encourage you to start by searching your Polaris, the Polaris search, do your RIT search. It's much easier to learn electronic registration if you're comfortable with TierraView, at least some aspect of the software. It's just another piece of the puzzle to learn. We will be conducting lunch and learn sessions it's actually covering searching and RITs. It won't deal with electronic registration, but to help you get started using TierraView for new users. And the schedule and the locations, invitations are available at the TierraNet booth. It's free, we provide lunch. It's a good way to get started using the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Our next speakers are Kim Little and Bonnie Yeager. Kim is a name that is synonymous with writing and lecturing on electronic registration. He practices in London, Ontario, and is a Law Society representative on the Committee to Recommend Practice Standards for Electronic Registration. Bonnie was a former paralegal and law clerk for a number of years before proceeding to law school and graduating with distinction, and is now a practicing lawyer at Pallet Vallow. They will demonstrate a typical e-reg closing.
Can find it.
Kim and I are not here to really teach you how to use the system per se. There's lots of other vehicles to do that. Valerie mentioned the manuals, the video, the CD. The training base is great. I know my support staff have had a lot of success and a lot of comfort level in working with the training base. I'll confess that I've never used it. I'm too impatient. I just got right in and started using the system directly, but my support staff has really liked that part of it as well. And TierraView is wonderful. I probably pester them more than anybody with questions and things that I think it should do that we haven't quite got there yet, or things like that. But they're absolutely wonderful and extremely patient. as is the ministry staff, because, of course, TerraView will address software issues, but other issues that need to go to the ministry, you can get right through on the phone lines directly to them. And I think I'm getting London when I'm going through to the ministry. They are so good. And they've even, on some real testy issues, dug out precedents and things like that for us to work with. So it's great. What Kim and I would like to do is teach you a little bit about how easy it is to use the system. And it is easy. Not the first time. The first time it's a little bit testy. I'll confess that I think it took me at least half an hour to prepare my first transfer. The second one probably took 3 minutes. The learning curve is not great. You know, just get in there and start using it, and it seems to all fall into place. So Kim and I are going to demonstrate just by doing a simple transfer. Kim will act for the purchaser, and I will act for the vendor. And a practice that has evolved with electronic registration, and it's the London practitioners that have found it works, and I agree with them, it does, is contrary to our paper process where the vendor prepares transfers with input from information from the purchasers. It works a lot easier in most situations for the purchaser to go onto the system first, because the system does input much of the vendor information. So we're just sort of reversing our roles a little bit. I will say that that took some time for me to get my head around as well. And there are situations, and still as we're moving into Peel with other solicitors that aren't familiar with it as well, where we may have 2 transfers on the system, because the vendor will automatically think they have to prepare it, but the purchaser has already prepared it. It's not a problem. You can work around all those things. But it is a learning curve, and I encourage you all to get started. Okay.
We're going to try and make this work using a PowerPoint presentation. And the other reason that the purchaser solicitor should start is that you should search your executions right at the beginning. And if you do that, and there is an execution against one of the vendors, the particulars of that execution reside in the document itself, and they're always available to view and to be answered by the vendor's solicitor. So it's just another reason that after all these years of arguing with Jamie's Law Society, or Law Association, that Ottawa should come on with the rest of the province, now we're going back to the way they did it. So let's start with, we've gone down here. There we go. So here we are. We're going to be making a presentation for the transferee. Now, the object of all of this is not for you to look at the detail of these screens, because you're not going to see it, and it's just to demonstrate that it's easy to do and to show you the kind of flow that it gives. So don't pay attention to the particulars. Look at it from a general point of view. So I'm acting for the transferee, and I'm going to log on. And the first thing we do is we log on to the system. So here, this is the logon screen. I put in my name and my password. And up comes a screen that tells me how much money I've got in that impressed deposit account. Not the account that you pay your fees and land transfer tax from, but from your deposit account that looks after your searches. And I'm really fortunate today because I've got $50,000 in that account. And it also points out, it shows you 2 things. If you've got a message from another lawyer, it'll show it in here. And what this one on the lower one says is that I've got some messages. I've got some newsletters from Terranet that have been sent to me. And Terranet's sending newsletters. I find there's one every second day, and sometimes 2. And it's interesting and valuable information that helps us go through the process of electronic registration and searching. So we've come to that screen. We move on to the next screen, and this is a screen showing you the main menu. The main menu is across the top. The next screen is the screen that we're going to select, and it's to create a docket. You can only work in TerraView if you've opened a docket. So what we'll do here is create a docket, and here is the screen that allows us to create a docket. And what most of us will do in this screen is put our file number and our file name in the docket, and then we can create documents within that docket that will be charged to that file. The next one is to open the docket. So we now, what you see highlighted in blue are words that say open docket. So now we open the docket, it gives us the name, and we confirm that that's exactly what we want. Click on OK and move on to the next screen. And now we're going to select create a new document, excuse me. So that drop-down menu, you click on Instrument, which is the main menu for creating documents in TerraView. You click on that. It gives you a variety of documents. You want to create a new document, so you click on Create New. It's highlighted in blue. And then you're allowed to decide where you want to go next. Now, we're creating a transfer, because that's what Bonnie and I are doing. We're just creating a simple transfer today. And what's highlighted is Transfer. Now, there's another menu that comes out of this. There are a variety of transfers that you can create, not just a simple transfer. You can create a transfer by a personal representative or a variety of others. So we're just doing a simple transfer this time. So we'll click on Transfer, and up comes the next screen, which is the main transfer screen. And it's blank because what I'll have to do now is move on and insert the consideration. I insert the consideration, and I insert the property identifier. And once I've inserted the property identifier, the description of the property automatically loads in. And although you can't see it, and I can hardly see it on the screen on this laptop, the description of the property is loaded in there, and we proceed. Now, we're moving now into the screen relating to the property itself. And in this screen, you see any details that there may be that are already loaded in. If you're going to change the description, if it's been a severance, or you're changing or you're adding an easement or anything of that nature, you're going to change the description in these screens. And down here at the bottom, and I find this annoying, but there's nothing you can do about it because I deal with multi-lot or multi-unit transactions a lot. You have to put an administration area in each individual parcel, and I expect 5.0 will deal with that problem. But this also gives you the opportunity to put the street number, street name, and municipality, and the postal code all in there. We move on to the next screen, which is RITs. Now, here's where I'm going to search RITs. I click on RITs, and another screen opens to the right of that. And I just put in the particulars of my docket, if I'm changing the docket. And then it opens the RITs screen. And the RITs are automatically searched against all of the persons who are transferors. So you don't have to put any names in. All you have to make sure is that your name and your file identification is inserted so that the RIT, which will now print if you ask it to, and that's a different process, but at this stage you have to ask it to print the RIT certificate, but it'll print all that information.
It comes out automatically now in my 4.2.
Oh, does it? I thought it only came out automatically when you were registering.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, you're right.
I think you have to
Not the
request
search
it when you're
process.
doing the searching. Anyway, at this stage, what it says here for me today, fortunately, is that it's clear. So I'm not going to have to ask Bonnie to clear the executions. The next screen is the transferee screen. And since I'm acting for the transferee, I'm going to insert the transferee's particulars, the names, and the address of the transferee, and the birth date. All of that goes into this. I'm sorry that I'm turning my back on you. I hope you can still hear me when I turn my back. If not, I'll repeat it. I will fill in all of this information at this point in the document. Now, the Planning Act statements, I've selected from the tree on the left-hand side the Planning Act statements, And I've already searched my title, and I know that there is no offense against the Planning Act. So I'll fill in that box on behalf of the transferee at this stage. Then we're now into the land transfer tax. Yes, this is the land transfer tax affidavit. It's basically the same information that you now put in a paper land transfer tax affidavit. The first screen is the name of the person who is the deponent. If all of the transferees are going to complete the affidavit, you can click all in a box on the right-hand side, and it will autofill from the document that from the information you've already put in it. It'll autofill the names of the parties. And the one that I get caught on most often is that you have to say that I'm a party named in box C.
I'm glad I'm not
One of the transferees. What happens when you go to complete this and you do it wrong, you get an error message in Boolean language that nobody can understand. And you'll be terribly frustrated by this as you go through these things. But the error message comes up, and Bonnie and I are alike on this. We always forget, or often forget this. And the error message comes up, but we've seen it often enough now that we don't have to worry about it. We get right back into it and correct it. Then there are other screens in the land transfer tax affidavit, and this one is this must be the greater than 400,000 screen. There is then the actual consideration screen. You fill in the actual consideration. And then this screen is the assessment roll number. You fill in the assessment roll number and the jurisdiction, the administration area. And then there are some other screens in the tax that are, this is the school tax screen. So this is all the same stuff that we're doing presently in the paper system. Now I want to identify the document, and this is very important from Bonnie's point of view, because she's acting for the transferor. So what I can't point to it. I wanted it. Well, I can do it this way. You won't be able to see it. Can you see that cursor? No. Well, this is the document name, and I want to give this a name that's going to be recognizable by me and by Bonnie, because I'm going to name it by the transaction, A sale to B. Then the next one is to identify who I am. I'm acting for the party 2, and so I click party 2 in the second box down there. And in the third box it says who's going to pay the fee, and I'm going to say I'm going to pay the fee. So I click on that box and I say party 2. Then this is the schedules. We'll go on to options. There are a number of ways to save here. There's an icon, and I always use the icon. I don't get back into the option menu to save the document that I've prepared. But under the options menu, there's a drop-down menu, and it allows you to save what you've already done. So you click on save. Now I want to compose a message and send it to Bonnie. So I click on the message drop-down menu on the menu at the top, and it gives me the opportunity to, gives me an opportunity to compose a menu. So I select compose, and then I have to find out what Bonnie's full name is. And since I forget her full name, there's an ability to do a search. So I put a % before Jaeger, and I click find, and up comes Bonnie's name. It searches every person who has a PSP with the name of Jaeger, probably not too many, and it shows me the Bonnie Jaeger that I want. Then I click on highlight that, and I compose a message identifying, and in the message I identify the document that I'm preparing so that Bonnie can read it, because often the title line isn't long enough to enable you to understand exactly what the document is or what docket you want to open to accept it into. So I've now sent the message to Bonnie saying, here's the document, I've prepared my part of it, you go ahead and prepare yours. And well, this is the signing page and nobody's signed, so now it's over to Bonnie. I've picked up the phone and said, I've done what I was going to do, it's over to you.
Thank you. Part of learning to use the system is learning some computer language or language that I wasn't familiar with. And I was remembering as Kim was going through the land transfer tax affidavit the first time I had done one, and it said something about administration area not complete. And I'm saying, administration area? What the devil are they talking about? And of course, all they meant was the jurisdiction, the city, the township, that kind of thing. So again, it's a learning curve. It's not a long one, but don't get too frustrated when you get silly things like that. Pick up the phone if necessary and just ask Tara View. They'll help you with any of that. Okay, Kim has prepared the document from his perspective. Well, I guess it's bypassed me logging into the system, but when I go into the system, when I log into TerraView, it will show me that I have messages. So even if Kim hasn't called me, and I do encourage you to communicate with the other solicitor, it will show that I have a new message. So I've gone into the system. It says that I have a new message, and I want to view that message. The message will come up on the screen, that it will show the document and that you want to be able to get access to it. And again, by right-clicking on that, it will allow you to accept access to that document. It gives me the name of the document because until that point, I really don't know for sure what transaction it's for. And that's why it's important when you're doing these things to not just use the default, like transfer one, charge one, that kind of thing. If you can put a little bit more detail in there, there's not a lot of room for it, but there is enough at least to put the names in, and it will help you be able to identify where you want to put it. And think of the docket as your filing system. That's all it really is your internal filing system so that you know where to go back and get that particular instrument. So now I have accepted access to that document. I want to view what Kim has done. So I'm bringing up the transfer. And Kim has really done all my work. This is a simple transaction. Names haven't changed, whatever. But Kim has done all the work, and all I'm basically doing is going in and filling in information spousal status and so on for my transferors. The names have been pre-populated by the system. So I'm confirming for each transferor. For this one, we only have one transferor. So for this transferor over 18, not a spouse. We don't have spouse consenting. And in this TerraView system, we have to identify whether or not the document is being signed under power of attorney. It's not like the paper system where you assume it isn't and the parties are signing. We must tell the system whether it is or it isn't. It then brings up other screens that have to be filled in if there are powers of attorney. The demonstration has been prepared as if someone is signing under power of attorney. You'll be inputting your transferor's new address into the system, the same as we would normally do in paper. And of course, signing the Planning Act statements on behalf of the transferor. The demonstration that's been prepared anticipates this, importing a schedule. We don't really need that for our transaction. They've just done this, even though we can't see it, I guess for the purpose of demonstrating how easy it is to import a schedule, and it really is. You can just bring in an attachment from your existing system that you've either downloaded or you've created to import. And then it will let you view the schedule on screen that has been brought into the system. The document has now been complete. It has all the information that we would be normally preparing from both sides, and I can sign it for completeness. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're also assuming I've got my money, because I'm signing it for release as well. Normally, it wouldn't be done simultaneously. Normally, I'd be signing it for completeness and waiting for my money to arrive. And I'm identifying that I'm acting for the party from. And the system shows, if you go into the signatures tree on the left-hand side, whether the document has been signed, and if so, for completeness, release, and by whom. It has gone back to Kim. I'm not showing you the messaging back to Kim, but it will go back to Kim, and then Kim signed it also for completeness and release. And then we pick from the top menu bar the instrument drop down as well, and within that, tell the system to register the transfer. The program will show you all the documents that you've created within that specific docket, and you're normally registering every document that's in there. As I say, unless maybe you've got 2 transfers, and then you have to know which one's the right one because they will stay in the same docket. That's for people that make mistakes initially like me. And then just select the transfer that you want to register, and the system will ask you whether you want to sub-search or not. In almost every case, the answer is yes. If you have searched executions earlier that day within the document, it will not search it again because it will have that information available. Otherwise, it'll automatically search executions on the registration of the transfer as well. So we're going to tell it to register, and it pops up with your last instrument number on the parcel register. So you want to have your search handy so that you've got that information available at the time you're doing the registration without having to scramble for it. And then it'll tell you very simply that registration is successful. I give you your instrument number, and with the 4.2 software, it'll automatically print out your execution certificate and your registered copy of the document with the registration number on it. Let me tell you, the clients are impressed. I do a lot of estate work and just sort of simple transfers and sometimes things that go with that. And to have a client in your office that you can have sign the authorization and be able to register instantaneously and hand them their document, they're just blown away. They can't believe that we can actually do those things. But it is a very, very simple process. The learning curve really is short, as I keep on saying. And I love it. My support staff, once they get into it, they're all, it's always that something new is a little bit hard to get going on, but as soon as they do, they love it. My estates clerk, every time now she has a transmission or survivorship application or something like that that's in a jurisdiction without electronic registration, it's just that much easier. And I'm going on vacation actually for a couple of weeks, and she says, "Oh, no, nobody else in the office really knows the system like you do." And but they'll have to, and it works really, really well.
Just to add to what Bonnie did my registration for me.
That's okay.
But I'd given her permission to do that. But the amazing thing about it is how fast it happens. It's just seconds. It doesn't take a minute, just seconds.
No lineups.
Yeah, Randy did say at one time, I think that on June 30th, there were 100 registrations in Middlesex in the last hour. Amazing. Now, I just have a few concluding remarks. We've taken longer than normal to demonstrate this. It really only takes 3 or 4 minutes to do one of these. My small firm, there are only 4 of us, and well, one's a litigator and the other's a commercial guy, or 2 of them are commercial guys. We've done 300 or 400 registrations since this began, and we haven't encountered one major problem in using the system. The one thing that both Bonnie and I want to say to you is start early. Jamie has a little saying. Say it.
We were looking for metaphors. choke on it. There's only one service provider here, and Terranet are very polite about the fact that the Law Society doesn't like to get it looking as if we're promoting a service provider, but there is only one. It's not a question of promotion. If you don't have TerraView electronic searching now, get it. Learn that. Learn the RIT search so that when you get to eWrench, and you will have less to swallow at that time. It's a much easier way to approach it.
Well, and Jamie had an even more pleasant way of describing that last little bit, and that is that smaller bites always taste better. More and more lawyers in Middlesex are finding that doing some document preparation themselves is useful. As Bonnie was saying, it's handy to sit there with the client and just fill in parts of the document while the client's giving you the information. It saves a little bit of time, makes sure that it's done accurately through you. The other thing is that there are some workflow problems that you're going to have to consider. So think about the workflow in your own office. Think about how it's going to work, how you're going to use your staff, how you're going to do documents yourself, how you're going to deal with the clients. Think about those things. Read the Law Society practice directives. They help you determine the way that you will deal with other lawyers practicing in the electronic registration system. Consider the type of Terranet transition account you'll open, trust or general. Bonnie's firm uses a trust account. They're a larger firm. They want control so that there has to be a lawyer signing a Form 19B to authorize a transfer of money out of trust into out of the transition trust account that's paying the land transfer tax and registration costs. In my firm, we're a small firm. We have enough control. It's much easier for us, it is much easier, to use a general account for the transition. What we do is, as we close the deals during a day, we write a check on the trust account on that particular deal. At the end of the day, we take all of the checks that we've written, that we would normally have written to the Minister of Finance. We take them all to the registry office or to the bank. Some people may still take them to the registry office. We take them to the bank and we deposit them to the transition account. Terranet clears that account at the end of the day or the beginning of the next day, so you've satisfied the Law Society regulations or bylaws as they are now, because you have incurred the expense on behalf of the client. You're now drawing money from the trust account, you're depositing it to a general account or a trust account, and it's being withdrawn at the end of the day. Complete the paperwork early for that account. Do it now. Somebody else has said that already, but it's really important. You don't want to be caught on the last day without a transition account and without it being authorized. Make sure you've got it all in order. That's the license for the Terranet equipment, the personal PSP, the agreement that allows you as an individual and your staff members to use the system, and the bank account. And then, most important of all, and this is the biggest problem, as you've heard, consider how you're going to move funds around. As you've heard, there is no simple answer to it. There are all kinds of things happening in Middlesex, all kinds of ways that it's being done. We haven't found one single way that's convenient. But there are lawyers who are sending certified checks by courier, which I don't like, but it happens. There are direct deposits to bank accounts, and there's a problem with guaranteeing that the funds are actually there. If you're acting for the vendor, are you absolutely certain that it's certified funds that's been deposited to your account? Some lawyers are even saying, if I get into a real problem and it's the end of the day and I've got to get the money there, I'm going to take it myself. So there are all kinds of problems with it. We've all got to think about it, how we're going to solve it. Get together and talk about it amongst yourselves. But then Bonnie and I have one thing to say together, and if Bonnie says it, I endorse it.
cooperate, accommodate, and be considerate of your fellow practitioners. We really need, especially at the initial stages, and I think it will be continuing throughout with the system, is we have to be a little bit more considerate of what we do and how it affects the other side. We must communicate early. I was at one seminar when someone wanted to know how they would know who to send it to or whatever else. I said, you know, we really can still pick up the telephone. It's not impossible on a real estate transaction to talk to the other side. Put yourself back into the game a little bit here and really work together.
And start early.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning as well. I hope that it was enjoyable for you. We'll open up the floor to any questions that people may have. Perhaps we'll just wait a few minutes for some of the people to exit the building.
You want this chair, Leonard?
Nope.
Goes easier every time.
You're not here. Sorry for registering your document.
You did it last time.
Did I?
Yeah, we agreed that you'd do it.
Okay. I don't remember that. Getting too old.
It's simple to do, isn't it?
Well, it really is. It's great.
London,
What's the name of your law firm?
Little, Inglis and Price. It's in the book. It's in the materials.
Oh, no. I think we haven't come across it.
It's in the materials.
We talked to the trustee.
Ah.
I just wanted to paralegal. Not just one paralegal.
Well, you have staff in London, I think.
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah, we do. I think I was left there.
There was a woman who moved to Windsor, and I don't remember her name.
Oh, Mary Jo?
She was very good.
Yes, she was. But I'd like to
Well, it's just an overview. Okay.
Hi. I'm a sole practitioner at Oakville. Like, what actually happens on closing day? What exchange the documents and the keys?
Well, you've used.
Assuming I'm going to do it myself. Okay, I don't have any office staff, let's say. Well, am I going to take the money, certified check, the keys, the other documents, and then
No, what happens? No, what happens generally is that the document registration agreement is used, and it's an escrow closing. So the vendor will have sent over the keys and all the vendor's documents, all the off-title documents, in advance, a day or two beforehand. And you will have sent all of your documents, maybe, or I do, undertaking to readjust and things like that. Then you send them back, along with the check. And you can send it by courier or whatever you're going to do. And you'll be sitting in your office, and the vendor's lawyer will be sitting in their office. And when the vendor's lawyer gets the money, the vendor's lawyer will sign for release. There's a signature for completion and a signature for release. The vendor's lawyer or the vendor's staff will sign for release, and then you can register. No. You can delegate to this purchaser.
if you got closings in more than one jurisdiction, which happens around Toronto a lot?
Well, if they're all electronic, you'll be able to do them from your desk.
But everything
But you
gets
gotta
sent
move.
in advance except for the money, which is the day of.
Yep. And we have a problem like that in Middlesex, where there's a community outside the center of Middlesex, and people are they've worked with their bank to transfer money back and forth. See, Alan. And what they're doing is they've designed a form, and they've made arrangements with their bank, so that what they do is they'll ask me, if I'm acting for a purchaser, to take this form to the bank, along with my certified check, and have the bank sign the form. they will have made arrangements with the bank ahead of time to receive the money. I'll take the money or have it taken over, and the form will say, this branch of the bank acknowledges having received a certified check in the amount of so many dollars and having deposited it to this account. Then I go back to my office and fax that through to the other lawyer, who then checks with his own bank, ensures that it's there, and signs the document for release. It's complicated.
Sounds like an incredibly complicated process that
Yeah.
requires lawyer time.
Well,
How are you going to recover money and make it worthwhile as a lawyer?
That doesn't require lawyer time if you use staff to do it,
Well, what I'm
but
saying
it does.
what happens to legal fees? How are you going to stay in business as a lawyer with all this?
How are any of
I
us
mean-
going to stay in business? I mean, we're competing with title insurers,
it's-
we're
I mean,
competing with each other. When I started
We're giving
practice
our
40
services
years
away.
ago, I got $187 a deal. Today I get $500 for the same deal, but the house is 10 times as expensive. We've done it to ourselves. There's no answer to that question. How are we going to stay in practice? I guess we're going to have to find ways to and put the pressure on the bank. We're going to have to lobby the
I mean,
banks.
the bank is doing half the business with all the mortgage stuff is gone. Banks don't refer you mortgage deals any longer. They do it all internally.
Yeah. Well, the refinance.
90% of it, they do internally.
New loans they'll send to you. Well, as soon as it's sort of like the same as in the paper system. How long before the closing do you get the vendor in to sign? A week? Sure. It doesn't work that way.
You have to change some of the
And the problem is that the current
Sure, you get that money in advance.
and a lot of the stuff you can send. The Joint Committee considered all of this and recommended that documents could be exchanged by fax. And the document registration agreement talks about exchanging off-title documents by fax, as long as paper documents are forwarded within 7 days.
That makes sense.
So you can exchange your documents by fax.
Sure it is.
Getting the money around is a problem. The rest of it